I think we all know we live in a crazy busy world, and busy people do crazy things. So one of the most delicious things about running workshops in the art of paying attention is that people love to sidle up to you and confess their most crazy stories about what they do when they're too busy. So I'm going to share the last 3 that I got, and it's only in the last week all these stories happened. The first was a finance professional who admitted to me that she put her toaster in the fridge when she put it away that morning. That's okay. She found it when she came to make dinner the next night. As she said that, the guy opposite her in the workshop said, "Well, I must admit, the other day when I made a cup of coffee, I poured the boiling water into the coffee jar, not into the coffee cup." A little bit of a mess. But the best story actually came from my own sister, who rang me to share her latest seniors moment, as she called it. She said, "I went to a meeting and I came out 2 hours later and the car was still running." Very good. I thought that was great in my own family. As I said to her, it's not a seniors moment. It's a busy moment. It's a crazy busy moment. And so tonight I just want to explore, why do we do this? What is it about attention that allows us to do some of these crazy things when we are really overwhelmed? And I suppose that's the biggest challenge. Attention is a really fragile and very, very limited resource. In any given day, we have a bucket of attention to use, and when we use it up, that's it. It cannot be stretched, it cannot be increased, it can only be used better. And the reality is that the world we live in is probably more like this. There's too much to focus on. I don't think any of us really walk around our day with just a few simple things that we can gently give our attention to, and nothing to distract us or come at us or steal us away. And it's interesting because you're going to be sitting here maybe using your devices, and I'm going to talk about devices a bit tonight, but that's okay, keep using them because it's good purpose. But there really is too much to focus on for this limited resource. And our brain has a few tricks, and one of them is to go onto autopilot. In fact, a really interesting study out of Harvard revealed that 47% of the time, almost half our day, we're doing one thing and thinking about another. So we really do it mostly in the things that we know well, where our body knows the moves and it can go about the actions without the brain being engaged. So that's why the toaster ends up in the fridge, because I put things away every day and the body knows the moves. But when the brain is so disengaged and thinking about something else, the fridge looks like the cupboard. The coffee goes in the wrong little thing that looks like a cup. The car gets left on because the body just jumps out and goes to the meeting. But in all of these instances, people, if they could reflect on it, would admit that they were definitely thinking about something at the time. They were probably rerunning something that happened the day before, might be planning something that's coming up that's worrying them. Particularly in my sister's case, she was going to a meeting and she had that meeting on her mind and she wanted to get some outcomes. Her mind was well ahead of her body. And so what gets missed is the stuff that your brain is simply not paying attention to. And if you think about most of our days, from morning to night, they are a series of routines. We get up on the same side of the bed, most likely. We go through the same morning routine. We have our shower, moving our body in the same way. We eat our breakfast in the same place. We probably go to work the same way. We probably sit down at our desk and turn the on button on and get up and do the same thing while we're waiting for the computer to boot up. Get our tea and coffee at the same time. So our days are full of routine. So it's not surprising that half of the time our attention is somewhere else. And this is when things get missed. And this is when really those fascinating stories happen. I love them. But the really important thing about this is not that we should be able to think we would win all this back. I would never set a goal for anyone to say you're going to get 100% of your attention back with every single thing you're doing, because the brain goes onto autopilot for really good reason. It's like the energy save mode in our heads. You know, I don't need to use all this attention on a mundane task, so what can I use it for? So off it goes and wanders through some really interesting things. But imagine if you could get 10% of your focus back to the things that maybe you would like to get done in a day, that's when things get finished. That's when relationships are strengthened. That's when outcomes are achieved. And that's really our goal here with attention, is to win back moments. And it's one of the reasons our book is called One Moment, Please. Because if you started with just one moment back in your day, it's amazing what can get done. So when you think about this, maybe set yourself a target, 1%, 5%, 10%. And if you got to 20%, you're probably doing better than anyone in terms of winning back the amount of outcomes you can get with your attention in a day. But it's a really important thing, not just for ourselves as individuals, but in businesses. And in fact, in businesses, it's so critical because distractibility in a business environment is what leads to lack of productivity, mistakes being made, clients being dissatisfied, leaders not being able to engage their staff. And I often think this quote, which I pulled out of a book that isn't very recent, it's fairly old now, companies that succeed in the future will not be those expert in time management, but in attention management. If you think about attention as a resource at your disposal to be wasted and frittered away or to be harnessed on what you want to achieve, that's the most powerful resource, and it's exactly what it is. But we have all sorts of plans to manage resources in our business. We have finance plans, we have IT plans, we have asset management plans, whatever the things are in your business. But do we manage the most precious resource that actively? Or do we just hope it happens? And I think now more than ever, businesses are starting to realise we cannot hope it just happens anymore because too many of us are being pulled in too many directions. So the question here is not whether we will be able to attend to everything. It's actually about whether we can pay attention to the things that matter most. And one of the really relieving aspects of this is that everyone right now should say, there is no way in any given day I will get done everything I think I should get done. Because I bet all of us have to-do lists like this, or multiple to-do lists written everywhere, or to-do lists in here as well as out there. And there's more on them than your attention could actually do in a day, even if you were focused. So one of the first things to do is just say, it's not about doing everything, but it's about giving attention to the things that matter most. If you can achieve that, that would be the sort of outcome that's powerful. But when you're really busy-minded and going from one thing to the next, it's probably the last question we really ask ourselves. Attention will go to the thing that screams loudest, that flashes fastest, that beeps in our pocket most often. It won't make you stop and go, are you sure you want to waste a few moments of attention on this thing? It will just go to those things. So, if we think about our world, every 5 minutes you'll get an email in your inbox. And that's probably for some of you, I think you probably feel it's much more than that. It just goes ding, 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 ding. But it's on average every 5 minutes in the business environment. Every 4 minutes, the average person picks up their device to check it. Whether it made a noise or flashed or did anything at all, we just pick it up to check. Don't want to miss anything. It's an insidious thing. I call them Trojan horses because they came offering the promises, the riches, everything. And they've unleashed hell in our minds and in our society. But the question with devices is not whether we should have them. Of course we should have them. They're wonderful tools. The question is whether you are the master or the servant. And when it comes to attention, these know how to play your attention like a toy. And I haven't got time to go into that one, but there's really interesting reasons why. One of the things that we do need to know about attention is our dominant sense is sight. And our second dominant sense is hearing. So anything that gets in your sight or you hear is most likely going to pull you away. So of course, devices are really good at that. 44% of people, the first thing they turn to in the morning is their mobile phone, whether they've got a partner next to them or not. How many people here sleep with their phone next to the bed? How many people are going to tell me it's because it's your alarm clock? It is. Remember those things with a round face? Little bell things. I think there's a whole industry we've put out of business by using our mobile devices as alarm clocks, and it's an excuse. And I'm sorry, we'll have the arguments later. But when you think about the way your attention works, it's like a snake. Whatever it goes to is what sets its path from there. So if the first thing your attention goes to is to check things on your device in the morning, that sets up your brain for what it dwells on from there. So we have to think again, is that what matters most? That's always the question. Every 11 minutes, if you work in an office environment, you're likely to be interrupted. Not only by the casual attention thief who wanders past to tell you the latest gossip, but by a new policy, something that's got changed, something that needs to be done that you didn't have on your list. Interruptions are everywhere. And if you've got really strong attention, you handle those well. But the reality is that it can take up to 25 minutes for us to return our attention to the original task after we're interrupted. And that's not just because attention can become very unsettled. It's often the case that when you're interrupted, the first thing you'll do after that is go, well, now what? What am I going to do? Okay, well, I may as well get that cup of tea now. So you get up, you wander off, you do a few other things, you'll talk to someone else on the way past, you'll do something that you just, oh, that's right, I'll go and photocopy that. And by the time you sit back and come back to the thing that was in front of you, 25 minutes is gone. So we're talking again about attention management. Imagine if you were in charge of your attention rather than letting it take you for a ride. How much more could you have achieved if you'd won a few lots of 25 minutes back in your day? Huge outcomes for just a few small choices. The amount of information that comes at you in any given day is equivalent to what would fit in 174 newspapers. You are not consciously processing that amount of information, but you are assaulted by it in our world as it is now. That's only the outside world. We all have 70,000 thoughts a day. Our mind does not stop playing with things. Set a trigger off, like, talking about your latest holiday with someone, and the next thing you're thinking, where will I go next year? Gee, I really should plan that. I might go on the internet when I get home and think, what are all those places? I really wanted to go to Barcelona. Off you go. The amount of thoughts you can have in a very short time is quite significant. The interesting thing about thoughts is they seem so important, so we like to dwell on them. But apparently 90% of our thoughts are exactly the same as the day before. And of course, makes sense, because 90% of what we do is probably the same as the day before. So you think, what am I going to have for lunch today? Will I have the bagel, or will I go and get the sushi? And you had that thought yesterday, and you went through that cycle yesterday. So it's like the song that just replays in the mind. The other interesting thing is that 70% are tending to be negative. Our brain has a tendency to focus on the negative. It plays with negatives. So you think about, again, the people who were pouring the water into the coffee jar and putting the toaster in the fridge, what was probably going through their head was not just thinking about the day ahead or thinking about the day they had, but thinking about what went wrong in that day, or worrying about what might go wrong in what we're coming up to. Our brain likes to fix problems, so it will dwell on the negative. It likes the positive, but it's sort of like, oh, that's nice. Now I've got to move on to something else. So I'll play with something that's more dangerous and more interesting. That is a tendency we tend to have, even if we think we're positive people. Watch your thoughts over the next week and see how many times it goes to what could go wrong. So the other one, and some of you may have this, trouble going to sleep at night. How many people struggle with that? How many people wake up in the middle of the night and the brain switches on and that's it? So 30% of people really do suffer from insomnia because of the busy mind. And again, if you've got a busy mind all day, what makes you think that it will suddenly go quiet just because you've asked it to? Whatever you train your brain for, it gets stronger. So if you train it to be busy all day, it's going to be busy all night as well. So the secret to getting a good night's sleep is to start early in the day to bring moments of calm and stillness. For a moment, just train it to stop. Just train it to slow down. And by the time you get to sleep time, it's got a new habit. It takes a few weeks to get that one. Attention is an amazing thing. We call it the currency of care. I talked about it being a resource earlier. And a resource is like everything, something that you use. And when we say pay attention, we are giving something out to get something back. And it is the most precious thing we can give out. When you pay attention to something or someone, you're really saying, this is what I care for most in this moment. So it is the currency of care. And attention is a very animating force. You think about times where someone has really given you their attention. And then you think about times where you've been with someone and they've started to wander. And you can see them go. It's a physical force. It drops back, their eyes empty out, and it's like their body becomes lifeless. And we're the same. If our attention's wandering, we are less full of life. And here's a really interesting thing that we've found over the years. When we do workshops with people and they're practicing paying attention, they get better looking. That is my promise to you, 100%. You get better looking. For leaders, this is really important. I'll just touch on one thing. There was an interesting study done by Gallup about leaders and what they pay attention to. And what we know is this very simple thing. Very simple graphs I'll explain. On the left, it's when a supervisor focuses on someone's strengths, they are much more engaged than when on the right, they focus on their weaknesses. We don't like bad news, so we shut down a bit. But what was interesting about this study, they looked at a third category. What happens when a supervisor ignores you? Disengagement levels skyrocket. You would be lucky to keep employees that feel like they are constantly ignored. Attention is the foundation for great leadership. But we could use this graph to look at a whole lot of things. We could look at service provision. When you go somewhere and you get great service, when people know your name, they pay attention to you, you're engaged. You will go back to the same coffee shops that know your name. You will not go back to a restaurant with the best food in Brisbane if they treat you like you didn't exist when you were there. It is attention that makes our world move. So really important thing, because when we neglect to give attention, when we withhold it, even if it's unintentional, and in most cases it's unintentional, we're just distracted, we're wandering, we're on autopilot. We don't realise though, what we're doing is holding up a sign saying, I don't care. It's a powerful feeling to get that from someone. And it has a big mark on us. In fact, the part of your brain that reacts in that case is the pain response. So, as I said, we don't want to have this crazy busy world, and we can get rid of the crazy from busy. That's really the goal. You will be busy, you'll have a lot to do, but maybe we can get rid of some of the crazy by returning attention to moments that really matter and giving it to the things that really matter. So I encourage all of you to just ask yourself that question throughout the day. What matters most in this moment? Because you are able to give your attention to whatever you choose when you get it back under control. And that's really the goal. And I hope that maybe some of you will come up and tell me some of your crazy busy stories later, because I'll be able to use them in my next presentation. No names. And if anyone wants to come to, I'm sorry that the postcard that you've all got on the bench there has workshops that are out of date, because we've already held them in Brisbane, but we run most of our workshops in-house. So if anyone wants to talk about the art of paying attention and how to revive it, more than happy to have a chat. And thank you for your attention.